It is time for Therapy Thursday, and we all strive to fit in one way or the other, but race can create an unnecessary barrier.
Therapist with Modern Eve is Krystiana Morales, here to share the 7 signs of racial trauma. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I think what's surprising is that you say that some people think it's an imaginary trauma, but it's not.
Yeah, so with any kind of trauma, like a car accident, experiencing a natural disaster, I think oftentimes you wouldn't go to someone and say, oh, that didn't happen to you. But because racism is sometimes insidious and it goes unacknowledged, I think people can say that's imagined if someone says that they've experienced it.
Why do you think personally this is so important to talk about?
Yeah, I think it's a crucial thing to talk about, especially when it comes to mental health, specifically the way that I guess racism often shows up in ways that we're used to, like anxiety and depression.
Right.
But again, because people think that doesn't have a toll on people's bodies or minds, it often goes untreated.
Krystiana, you were talking about if families and parents actually talk to their children about it, that we're better able to cope as we get older. My parents never talked about it, but they were very strong about it did happen. It was a bad thing, but never walked me through. And you also have a personal story too.
Yeah, so I come from a mixed identity background. My mom is Caucasian and my dad's from Mexico. So I grew up in very mixed spaces with both sides of my family, and just existing in the world. We all come around or come into contact with people of different races. But I think it's just something people in general don't know how to talk about, whether you be a white person or a person of color. It's just something I think people are very uncomfortable taking notice of.
Well, I'm so glad that we're talking about it today, and you have some awesome points that we want to hit. The very first one, you said not feeling safe in your body. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so this can often look like, if you're a person of color, experience like hypervigilance, so being aware of your surroundings, like to the point where you're constantly thinking something dangerous is going to happen to you.
So those are signs that you suffered maybe some racial trauma. Number 2, unwanted thoughts or memories related to discrimination. And I told you a story. I used to report, and I was at a Vietnam Wall, and veterans came up to me and they said, I don't want to talk to you because you remind me of the war in Vietnam. And I said, I'm not Vietnamese. Even if you are Vietnamese, it's a different time. But they didn't even want to look at me. And so the unwanted thoughts, you don't want to be there. And I didn't really talk about it afterward.
Yeah, and that can like sometimes come up in flashbacks, which is often a symptom of just PTSD.
And that's something that that person might not have totally resolved.
What about hearing racial slurs or things like that that might trigger you? How do you work through that?
Yeah, I think, again, that is something that often we call it invisible pain in the field of mental health. Those things often don't get talked about with other people, and just experiencing a shared space with a therapist who maybe looks like you or is a person of color and saying you've been able, or that's happened to you, can be very healing itself. It's just speaking that into existence instead of carrying it with you.
Yeah, I think during the Asian hate crimes that happened, it was comforting to know that you're not the only one that these racial slurs happen to you throughout your life. But okay, number 4, internalizing messages about your race based on previous traumatic events and experiencing discrimination. What can you suggest and recommend?
Yeah, again, for that, that internalizing messages, those often we get from media, but also from the people around us, and we call them schemas, and those are just like our internal beliefs that we have about ourselves. So working with a therapist who specializes in that cultural identity piece and just, I guess, regular talk therapy.
I love that you said working with a therapist, and Saray, it sounds like with you sharing your story that would have been very helpful for you, right? That's something that I think can really help. What about a constant sense of otherness?
Yeah, and again, that also kind of ties into that internalizing those beliefs, especially if you're getting messages from media and people around you that, like, with your experience, that, like, you're different. That can feel very othering when you're in a space with people that don't look like you. So again, being able to voice those concerns with a therapist can help.
Well, I think also the message, it would have helped me if my parents were better coped at talking about it and normalizing this is what happens. Not that it's good, but that it can happen. And for my own kids who are of mixed race, I don't want them to go through without the tools and maybe coping mechanisms. Not saying that it wouldn't happen to them, but something a little bit more empowering with talking with other people.
Well, I love that the discussion is being opened, right? This is happening. And social withdrawal, that's the last one. That one's got to be a big one.
Yeah, I feel like this for me is the most crucial one, especially because I think healing is very communal. There's this old indigenous saying that my healing is like tied up with your healing. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. And I think healing can work in the same way. If I heal my own pain, then that means I have space to show up for you.
Yeah.
So I think that social withdrawal, just being in therapy, but also just in spaces where people are saying, this has been my experience.
This
Right,
is so important, and I want to thank you both for getting vulnerable and sharing your story and really opening up about this.
I mean, those are signs to really look out for either in yourself or with your family members, your loved ones. And of course, if they're rebelling or acting out, seek a therapist and maybe talk to a trusted adult. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.
For more information, you can go to moderneve.org. Krystiana is there to help you out.
Thank you, Krystiana.